Imagine spending years carefully avoiding a topic, tiptoeing around it like it's a sleeping dragon, only to suddenly decide that actually you're going to poke it with a stick in front of millions of people. That's essentially what Keir Starmer just did with Brexit, and Nigel Farage is absolutely loving it. The Prime Minister stood up at the Lady Mayor's Banquet in the heart of the City of London and declared that Brexit significantly hurt our economy. But before we proceed, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more updates on the UK political insight. Thank you. Bold move. Stunning bravery. Truly the political equivalent of announcing you don't like dogs at Crufts. Welcome back to UK Political Insight, where we watch politicians either dance around controversial topics or crash into them headfirst with the subtlety of a rhinoceros on roller skates. Today, we're diving into Starmer's latest Brexit offensive, why he's doing it now, and why Nigel Farage thinks this is the best early Christmas present he could have asked for. So let's talk about timing, because in politics, timing is everything. Starmer decides to launch this attack on Brexit not in some quiet policy paper or subtle interview, but at the annual Lady Mayor's Banquet. For those unfamiliar, this is one of those big, formal City of London events where everyone wears fancy dress and pretends to enjoy overcooked chicken while discussing the state of the nation. It's basically the political equivalent of your company's annual gala, except with more champagne and higher stakes. And this is where Starmer chose to drop his Brexit bomb. His words were crystal clear, and for once, that phrase actually means something. He said, "We must confront the reality that Brexit deal significantly hurt our economy, not may have caused some challenges or created certain complications, but straight up hurt our economy." That's not diplomatic language. That's not carefully hedged political speak. That's a direct accusation. It's like watching someone finally say what everyone's been thinking at a family dinner, except the family is the entire country and half of them voted for the thing you're criticizing. Starmer went on to explain that there's no credible economic vision for Britain that doesn't position us as an open trading economy. Fair enough, most economists would probably agree with that. But then he said we have to keep reducing frictions and moving towards a closer relationship with the EU. And this is where things get spicy, because to a lot of people, especially those who voted leave, that sounds suspiciously like reversing Brexit by the back door. It's the political equivalent of saying you're definitely not getting back together with your ex while simultaneously moving back into their flat. He emphasized that we need to be grown up about this and accept that it will require trade-offs. Now, grown up is interesting word choice because it implies that anyone who disagrees with closer EU ties is being childish. It's passive-aggressive politics at its finest. You can almost hear the subtext. Look, adults in the room, we need to fix the mess that the emotional voters made. Whether you agree with his position or not, you've got to admire the audacity of basically telling 17.4 million people that their democratic decision was economically illiterate. But here's the kicker. Starmer's not just talking about Brexit. He's pointing out that Labour's already done deals with the US and India, and they're planning to keep going. So the narrative he's building is that Labour is the party of pragmatic international relationships, while, presumably, the previous lot were isolationist dreamers. It's a rebrand, essentially. Out with the ideological Brexit, in with the practical global Britain that happens to involve being much closer to Europe. It's like redecorating your house but keeping it the same color and then insisting it's completely different. Now, this isn't Starmer's first rodeo with Brexit criticism. Rachel Reeves, his chancellor, already tried to partly blame Brexit for her tax-hiking budget, which, let's be honest, is a bit like a student blaming their homework being late on their younger sibling eating it. Sure, maybe there's some truth there, but it's also incredibly convenient for deflecting from your own decisions. The budget was unpopular, people wanted explanations, and Brexit became the scapegoat. It's the gift that keeps on giving for politicians looking for something to blame. But if Starmer and Reeves thought they could just casually throw Brexit under the bus without consequences, they've clearly not been paying attention to British politics for the last 8 years. Because there's one man who has built his entire political career on Brexit, who sees attacks on Brexit as personal attacks on him and his supporters, and who will absolutely not let this slide. Enter Nigel Farage stage right, with a response that's part defensive, part offensive, and entirely predictable. Farage's response in the Daily Express was, to put it mildly, not subtle. He accused Starmer of blaming the 17.4 million people who voted for Brexit for Britain's economic disaster. Now, that's not exactly what Starmer said, but it's definitely how Farage is choosing to interpret it. And honestly, it's not a completely unfair reading. If you say Brexit hurt the economy, and Brexit happened because people voted for it, then logically you are kind of blaming the voters. It's just usually politicians are smart enough not to make that connection explicit. Farage called it a transparent attempt to shift the spotlight away from Rachel Reeves and her disastrous budget. And you know what? He's got a point. It's awfully convenient that just as people are still reeling from tax hikes and spending cuts, Labour decides now is the time to have a big national conversation about how Brexit is actually the root of all evil. It's classic political misdirection. Look over there at that old controversy, while we quietly implement these unpopular policies over here. It's the political equivalent of a magician's assistant waving their hands to distract you from the trick. Now, what makes this whole situation absolutely delicious from a political drama perspective is that Farage and Reform UK are probably thrilled about this. Starmer has just handed them the perfect wedge issue on a silver platter. Every time Labour mentions Brexit being bad for the economy, Reform can position themselves as the defenders of the people's democratic choice. Every criticism becomes evidence that the establishment never respected the referendum result. Every call for closer EU ties becomes proof that Labour wants to rejoin by stealth. Starmer's not just attacking Brexit, he's potentially galvanizing the very voters Labour needs to worry about. Farage's response is textbook populism, and I mean that as an observation, not necessarily an insult. He positions Reform UK as the only party that can be trusted to fix broken Britain. He promises to cut public spending, slash red tape, remove EU rules, and be on the side of small businesses and working people who make up alarm clock Britain. That last phrase is particularly clever because it evokes the image of hard-working, ordinary people while implicitly contrasting them with the London elite having fancy banquets. It's us versus them politics, and it's incredibly effective. He also promises to finally make good on the promise of Brexit by taking back control of Britain's borders, laws, and money. Which is interesting because Brexit technically already did that, at least in legal terms. But Farage is making the argument that Brexit hasn't been properly implemented, that it's been sabotaged by Remainers in power, and that only reform can actually deliver what people voted for. It's a clever political move because it allows him to simultaneously defend Brexit while acknowledging that things aren't great by arguing that we haven't really done Brexit properly yet. The final line of Farage's response is pure gold from a messaging perspective. He says Reform will never try to blame British voters for the problems created by the establishment's own failures. It's a direct shot at Starmer. It positions Reform as respectful of voters while Labour is dismissive of them. And it reinforces the narrative that there's an establishment creating problems and then blaming ordinary people for them. Whether you agree with this framing or not, you have to admit it's politically savvy. So what's actually happening here beneath all the rhetoric and positioning? Essentially, Labour has made a calculated decision that attacking Brexit is worth the political risk. They've looked at the polling, they've seen Reform UK eating into their support in certain areas, particularly those red wall seats that Labour needs to hold. By attacking Brexit, Starmer might be trying to draw a clear dividing line. If you want closer EU ties and economic pragmatism, vote Labour. If you want true Brexit delivered, vote Reform. It's a risky because it might push some voters away, but it might also solidify Labour's position with Remainers and soft leavers who regret their vote. Reform UK, meanwhile, is positioning themselves as the true inheritors of the Brexit vote. They're arguing that Brexit was right but hasn't been properly implemented, and that Labour's attacks on Brexit are really attacks on the voters themselves. They're trying to capture everyone who feels betrayed by the current economic situation but doesn't want to admit that Brexit might have been a mistake. It's a different gamble, but potentially an effective one, given how identity-driven Brexit voting was. The fascinating thing about this entire debate is how it reveals the fundamental tension in British politics right now. We're nearly a decade past the referendum, we've actually left the EU, we've negotiated trade deals, we've implemented the changes, and yet Brexit still dominates our political conversation. It's like a ghost that refuses to be exorcised, constantly hovering over every economic discussion, every trade negotiation, every election. Politicians can't ignore it, but they can't seem to move past it either. Starmer's approach is essentially to say, look, it happened, it was a mistake economically, now let's fix it by getting closer to Europe again without actually rejoining. It's pragmatism wrapped in criticism. Farage's approach is to say it was right, it hasn't been done properly, let's actually implement it and blame the establishment for sabotaging it. It's idealism wrapped in grievance. Both are trying to speak to voters' economic anxieties, but they're offering completely opposite solutions. What neither side seems willing to fully confront is the complexity of Brexit's actual economic impact. Yes, there have been increased trade frictions and costs. Yes, some sectors have struggled, but there have also been other factors. COVID, the energy crisis, global inflation, government policies unrelated to Brexit. Disentangling what's Brexit and what's everything else is genuinely difficult. But admitting complexity doesn't make for good political soundbites. So